Bruce DuMont back for hour number 2 of Beyond the Beltway. And in this hour, Judith Sherwin, our Republican, and Roberto Montano, our Democrat. They are joined by John Cass of the Chicago Tribune. And John, it's nice to have you with us. Welcome back to Beyond the Beltway.
Thank you for having me to be with such a brilliant panel on your 40th year.
Woo!
Doing Beyond the Beltway.
Well,
we were talking all the good stuff before you came back.
Oh, that's
so
good.
Now we'll go back to boring. We're not going to talk about drinking at conventions and crazy things that happen.
Well, this is, I know, generally speaking, you would be winging your way to Milwaukee or be in Milwaukee tonight for the opening of the convention tomorrow, which is going to be very unconventional. And literally, this is the first, I have been to at least one convention every year since 1964. So this is going to be very odd to me because I'm not going to either of the conventions, and because of COVID-19 and because there just isn't, they're not going to treat the media the same way. But I want to talk about something, John, to get your thoughts on. One story that came out last week from the National Intelligence leadership. They basically said that they have evidence and believe that Russia and China and Iran are all involved in some degree of trying to screw up our election this November. According to the published reports, the Russians supposedly are favoring Donald Trump, and the Chinese are favoring Joe Biden.
They would. They want his son to be the vice president.
Right.
They already know him.
So my question to you is, if I can get my question out, Judith.
Yes. Sorry.
My question is this. As a reporter, how concerned are you with a report like that? And as an American voting citizen, how are we to gauge what we are seeing and hearing, and how do we determine whether or not that might be some form of a bot or some sort of a campaign trick foisted by either the Russians or the Chinese or Iran?
Anytime foreign governments get involved in leaking what they're about to do, you have to think of it like politicians talking about ethics. Mm-hmm. You cannot trust them. That said, will people be trying to play games? Guess what? America tries to play games in other elections. Mm-hmm. This is how real grown-ups, and thanks for having me on a panel with real grown-ups, understand politics. All's fair in love and war, right? And what is politics but war? So I listened with intent to the last segment, when you were talking with the panel on voting. And I think that there's a way. I've got a plan, and I'll write about it this week. The Fauci plan. Mm. I'm a type 1 diabetic. And so my doctor said, stay away. Don't isolate. Mm-hmm. We must isolate. But at the same time, I've gone to butcher shops to get steak because you know what? I really like a good medium rare steak and beer. So if I care enough about a beer and a steak, as do many people, I think I care about our republic. So I'm going to put a mask on. I'm going to take my driver's license. I'm going to walk down to my polling and gloves. I'm going to walk down to the polling place here on the north side of Chicago where I live, not downtown, out of the 3 flat. And I'm going to cast a ballot the old-fashioned way. And I think that's important to do so for this reason. The Democrats want mail-in ballots because they think that helps them. Republicans don't want mail-in ballots because they think that doesn't help them. And I'm from Chicago, and so I've covered enough stories about the nice man helping the old people at the nursing home fill out their absentee ballots. What happens is, if the scenario that worries me for the whole country, Democrats and Republicans, is what if we go to a mail-in ballot and there is any question, if we end up with a hanging chad situation like we did in 2000, but in this context, in this country, the way we're all divided and barking at each other, it's not good for the country.
I want to go to Roberto, and I also want Andy Miles to listen to what I'm about to say. I'm getting reports that your audio, John, is very bad. So what I'm going to suggest is that I want Roberto to respond to what you've said about voting, and that maybe there's a patriotic reason to go out and try it for the Republic. And as we do that, I would like my producer to call you back on the phone, John, to see if our phone connection is much better than the video connection that we have right now, so we can hear you, because it is important that we hear you. You look terrific, but again, we want to make sure that the sound is as strong as it possibly can. But Roberto, we're going to go to you and let you respond to John's thought that if you're going out to the butcher shop, why can't you go out to vote?
So here's the thing: that font of progressive and liberal wisdom, the Heritage Foundation, has an online database of election fraud cases. They found over 1,200 cases of fraud in all forms, resulting in 1,100 criminal convictions over the past 20 years, in 250 million votes that have been cast by mail. Now, that's the Heritage Foundation. In 250 billion with a B, they found 1,200 cases, of which 1,100 were convicted. That's a felony. So the notion that that's actually an issue. I mean, I get what John's saying, because I too have been a precinct captain, and I know that we have to, be vigilant in defending democracy in that critical moment. But these people that do the work aren't a bunch of hooligans. They take an oath. They have to go through training. There's a board that oversees them, and it's adversarial. So it's not me saying it. The Heritage Foundation is the one saying it.
Do you think there's enough people to do that?
That the voter fraud cases, you can check online on their website, is just not really an issue.
Bruce, if I could respond to this.
Go ahead.
I mean, we are doing a little experiment right now. We just did one in New York. They could barely figure out who won the primary for this Republican running for the Congress.
Yeah.
I mean,
Manoli.
They have no idea who won. They finally just said, okay, it's going to be this guy, and that was the end of it. I mean, we can't have that with 130 million people, perhaps, going and voting for the President of the United States in the situation in which we are living in right now. If you can go to Walmart and you can go to the Jewel and you can go wherever you go, you put on your mask, you put on your gloves, you can put on whatever you like, go vote. Particularly, I thought Bruce had a great point before. We do have early voting. You don't have to be there with a lot of people, all right? And even if you are there with a lot of people, I was at Sports Authority today, and there were a lot of people, and I stood in the line with another, I don't know, there must have been at least 30 people in line, all right? We were all 6 feet apart because they have those little circles on the floor, and that's supposed to keep you safe. You can have the same thing going on in a polling place.
Okay, we've got a break. Judith, we've got a break. Back shortly.
Okay.
Bruce DuMont back, and we're going to go with John Cass on the phone for the rest of this interview, only because the audio on the Zoom was not good. John, are you there? Can you hear my voice?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I'm going to have you start this part of the discussion because for people around the country, again, we have people listening from coast to coast, and I don't like to make this program about Chicago, but Chicago has received so much publicity and notoriety because of the excessive amount of violence and the murder of children in our city that I think everyone around the country knows that it's become a national problem. And with the rioting and looting that has taken place in the city of Chicago is not the city that it was 1 year ago. John Cass is probably the most astute observer of the city. And John, I want you to share with the audience your concern about what the future of the city is like, and that what is the future of Chicago might be the future of other cities around the United States, given their relations with the police department and certain sectors of their community that don't respect the police officers?
We've got a couple problems here. One is the finances of the big cities. I'm sorry, but I'm hearing an echo here.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. But the finances of the big cities is terrible. The Democrats want to have $3 trillion to bail out the political pension deals that Democrats and Republicans have put through. The financial collapse is right on the edge, and then we have COVID and violence. So it's a bad scenario. And then, just the other day when we had looting in Chicago for the second time, we're seeing that Black Lives Matter people and others are they're defending the looting, and they're also how can I put this carefully? They're understanding publicly that the hard left sees violence as an answer.
Mm-hmm.
The
now we should
combination of all that is devastating. If you set up a group of people as evil, if you promote nonsense history like the 1619 Project, you begin to push inevitable conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I don't think the people, American people or the Democrats who would benefit in the short term or Republicans in the long term want to see that happen. We're already seeing it now in Kalamazoo with Black Lives Matter on one side, the Proud Boys on the other. I don't want to see that from my country.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anyone does.
We also have a situation, and Roberto, I want to get you to weigh in this because you're a Democrat, and I want to get your response to what John has said, is that what we do have in the wake of the looting that has taken place, the looting that took place about a month ago and the looting that took place a little over a week ago, you do have elected officials speaking out in support of those who have been part of the looting process, and some of them have been related to Black Lives Matter. Some have, not all, but they seem to be making an excuse for them, and yet they're publicly stating their position. And these are elected officials. They're not the mayor of Chicago. She is not saying this. But again, you have the president of the Cook County Board, who has basically slapped the hands of police officers for trying to defend the Christopher Columbus statute of several weeks ago. But you have the Democrat Socialist members of the city council, and I believe there's about 7 of them now. These are elected officials who represent voters in Chicago, and they're saying basically that defund the police, and that looting should be equated with reparations. Roberto, your reaction. I know you don't believe in that, but speak to the problem it creates for Democrats.
What's happening in Chicago is going to be the driving force behind the Donald Trump campaign. It is an echo to, if you look at the president's main slogan, "Make America Great Again," it's the again part that holds the magic. It's this nostalgia for order and for a time when things were right. And this is It's a painful, self-inflicted wound, in my opinion, that a lot of our elected officials are just committing and handing Donald Trump this issue on the silver platter. This issue is going to be highlighted to the detriment of Democratic efforts in suburban enclaves, because people are terrified that are feeding into this to come into the cities. And it's also hurting us because our, those businesses that are leaving, we have a 100-year-old business that's about to leave Chicago. Now, they're a fine jeweler, and maybe nobody thinks that they need fine jewelry, but when I get married, I want to buy a nice ring for my future wife, and I'm going to spend a little bit of money on that, okay? Those people that have been in Chicago for 100 years are starting to see that they don't want to come back. We've got restaurants shutting down. So
Macy's, again, for those people around the country who may have come to Chicago and shopped at Macy's in Water Tower, they've announced that they want to move out of Water Tower because of the looting that took place not only in their store, but on Oak Street just a block away.
Yeah, I was there Wednesday. I'm a realtor dropping off an earnest money check at one of the fancy schmancy offices, and it was beautiful from upstairs, from the 18th floor at 737 North Michigan Avenue. When you look down, it was gorgeous. The American flag, the city flag flying across from Water Tower Place. And then you came down to the street. And when you came down to the street, you saw that the Tiffany's windows were all busted out. Neiman Marcus was all busted out. That is not about George Floyd. That is about criminal activity masquerading as activism.
Judith Sherwin, I want to ask you, because obviously you're a longtime Chicagoan. I want to get your reaction to the way in which what's happening in Chicago, as Roberto suggested, what's happening in Chicago is it's a made-for-TV commercial for the Trump campaign, and you have Democrat playing into it by participating and supporting the looting, which the vast majority of Chicagoans abhor, both black and white.
Right. Well, I agree with you. I agree with Roberto. I mean, this is a commercial for Donald Trump. Every single time they do this, not only is what's going on in Chicago, I mean, they've reached a different stage now in Seattle, where they're going out to residential and I guess near suburban areas, and the Black Lives Matter people are going to people's homes and telling people they should give them the keys to their house because they don't belong there. When you say that people are terrified, they are terrified. They want to leave the city. I know a lot of people who want to leave Chicago. My son lives in New York. He's getting out. He's always wanted to live in New York. He can't wait to get out of there, and he's not the only one. People are fleeing the cities in droves. We don't want that.
John, I want to ask John Cass a question. Hopefully you can hear me, John. Do you believe that it's over the top to ask the question whether some of this violence that we see in Chicago, in New York, and in other cities, whether or not some of that instigation might be inspired by the Russians in an effort to help Donald Trump?
No.
You don't think so?
I don't think so. I don't know what John thinks.
John, what did you think?
But you know,
Judith, we know what you think. Let's see if we can figure out what John thinks if he heard the question. John?
I don't know if he heard the question.
Is John there, Andy? John is not there? Folks, I apologize. The second week in a row I've had to apologize for what we're dealing with here. But Roberto, let me ask you that question. Did you hear it?
Yes.
What do you think?
Obviously. Like, what's the most effective way to disrupt the democracy? You undermine the pillars of its foundation, public safety, healthcare. All this misinformation is cheap. They're spending almost no money.
The 1619 project is a project of the New York Times. Are they part of the Politburo? I mean, are you paying attention to where this is coming from?
The intention of the GSP is to make our country look bad, to weaken our country, so that they can have a relative enhancement in their
They're
power
getting a
globally.
lot of help from the Democratic Party and the media, who are their lapdogs. All right.
We've got to
A lot of
pause.
help.
We've got to pause. 1-800-723-8229. We'll have a caller, and hopefully we'll bring John Cass back into the conversation as well. I'm Bruce DuMont. Thanks for joining us tonight. Bruce DuMont back in Chicago. John Cass, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Kenton McCarthy, who is a frequent guest on this program, he has sent in the following text. He believes that all terrorism that we're dealing with goes back to George Soros. Do you agree with that?
No,
Okay.
I do not.
What percentage
Mr.
does?
Soros.
Go ahead.
Well, I think he's become like a character in a drama about from the right and the left.
Mm-hmm.
In point of fact, Mr. Soros has a political view. He's a billionaire.
Mm-hmm.
He hates Trump, and he's been contributing to liberal prosecutors throughout the country, including in Chicago, people who don't really want to put criminals in jail.
Right.
And but I don't think it's a vast conspiracy or anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had some occasion to study the issue
Right.
in great detail in recent days.
Right.
The larger question that I'm sorry for technical difficulties, but the larger question is that I think the hard left, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, and other hard progressives are devouring liberal Democratic mayors. That's what we're seeing,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not a Trump. Trump is not promoting it. I think he will take advantage of it, because when you have looting out in the suburbs, and suburban soccer moms are wondering, should I get a gun, and how do I listen to the police scanner? They don't forget that stuff. It's really simple. The Democratic Party that Roberto is part of is a party that, well, let's put it this way. They left many of us. We didn't leave them. And the traditional liberal Democratic Party is not the party that Joe Biden is appealing to. He's appealing to the hard left, and he's been very silent about the violence in Seattle and Chicago, and that only feeds anxiety, and I think it does help Trump in that respect.
Right.
But this is something larger than personalities like Soros, Biden, Trump, Kamala Harris. It's a larger issue. It's the hard left devouring, biting the hands, fighting the Democratic mayors like Lightfoot and others in other cities, and they know it. If the media doesn't want to report that, that's on them.
Roberto, what do you think of that? Do you agree with John? Is there a portion of what John said you agree with?
Well, I mean, the Democratic Party, like I always say, I'm not part of any organized party. I'm a Democrat. It's got a lot of moving parts. There are friends of mine were both police officers today and were activists today, and they had conflict, and I love them all. Friends that I know dearly. I know someone that pepper sprayed someone else, and so my heart goes out to the police on that one, because in my opinion, the police did their job, and when the police are allowed to do their job, we will have our city in order. Now, that's not to say that the message that these young activists are espousing isn't meritorious, but their methods is not serving their cause. in my opinion,
Roberto,
because it's making folks unsympathetic.
When I watch, and I want to be very delicate about the way I ask this question, and as will you in answering it, but when I watch the looting that's going on in Chicago, I am seeing the actions of, it's almost 100% black teenagers. That's where the unrest is. Now, if it gets into breaking windows and arson and a few other things, I'll throw Antifa in there, and I'll throw a lot of young white people in it. Not so much for the looting, but for the protesting. Now, my question to you is, based on television only, I rarely see identifiable Hispanics in that protest. Is that, do you agree with that assessment or not?
Well, sure. I mean, if you look at there were 24 arrests that were convicted as felons in the last issue we had on Monday, I think. And I'll say that if I recall correctly, 23 of them were African American. One happened to be Hispanic, and I think I know that guy. He's from 8th, California, and so I am very upset with that gentleman.
Why is that? Because black leaders and leaders of Black Lives Matter frequently talk about a black-brown coalition. But I don't see, and I assume when they're talking about browns, they're talking about Hispanics. I don't see a lot of browns in the Black Lives movement, and I certainly don't see them when it comes down to looting. So what is it about the Hispanic community? They obviously have some complaints against society as well, but it doesn't seem to rear its ugly head in violence against society. What's the answer to that?
So it's really important to separate the criminal activity from the legitimate protest.
Yes.
I personally was on the front lines protesting on May 30th at Trump Tower. I caught a lick of a baton. I'm not proud of it, but I was in the way. I was a medic at that action. So I do stand absolutely 100% in support of Black Lives Matter. But that is not the same as these people that are hijacking a noble pursuit for criminal intention. Those are two separate things. And so with respect to the Black Lives Matter movement, justice for police misconduct, people, what happened with George Floyd, that's completely tragic, Breonna Taylor, we bleed with our black brothers. When it comes to the criminal activity, the looting, that's just a totally separate thing. Now, we have certain privilege as people of color who are not black, because sometimes people think I'm Italian, or with respect to John, even Greek I've gotten.
Yeah.
And so we sometimes pass.
You could pass for a lot of stuff.
Yeah, we do. Like, people think I'm Muslim, they think I'm in South Asian. Happy birthday, by the way, to India, the world's largest democracy. They just had their birthday.
Damn, I forgot to send a card. Damn.
Yeah, but I'm not black, personally. And so I don't face the same things. Now, what I would say is that, to me, it's not so much that it's black youth that are being, caught up in this. I would look at the socioeconomics. I think it's the lower 20% of socioeconomic class versus the top 20% of socioeconomic class. I'm a realtor, so I think about these in terms of housing. If you look at who owns a home and where the wealth is, because a lot of wealth is transferred intergenerationally through homes, African Americans have the lowest percentage of home ownership. I am converting lots in Inglewood, which is a very socioeconomically challenged part of Chicago, into farms, because those properties won't appraise. Mm-hmm. The banks won't appraise them. And the highest and best use is a farm. Now, I'm proud of the fact that we're solving urban, deserts, but why don't black people get to buy houses? And why is it that? No, and
by the way, those are all viable, important issues to be discussed. And by the way, I just want to correct something if someone misheard me. Manford Danish asked, he thought that I had basically said that the people were looting were protesters. I don't mean to suggest that at all.
Right.
Protesters are one thing, looters are another thing. Okay,
Yeah,
the protesters, I support the right of people to protest peacefully. Peacefully, that's key. And looting is law breaking. There's no political affection to that. It's law breaking. So I want to be real clear about that. And then the third element is you have Antifa, which I don't think that's not a democratic organization. It is people who oppose all forms of government. So I don't even like the suggestion that all these people that are out there creating chaos are somehow, operatives of the Democratic Party. I do not buy that.
Bruce, if I
Judith.
could get a word in, I mean,
Sure.
the issue with people like Antifa and the anarchists who are running around with them, creating the chaos in the city, it's not so much that they are, people say they're the militaristic wing of the Democratic Party. I don't think they are. The problem is that except for the conversation we're having tonight with Roberto, I don't hear Democrats saying these are people who are doing bad things. These are people behaving like criminals. I mean, the first time we had the looting back in May, all right, the mayor's response, although she didn't praise the Antifa people, she wasn't exactly adamant like she was last Monday when she was, I would say, mad as hell over what happened on Sunday night, okay, and Monday morning. So, if you're going to take the police and you're not going to let them do their job, and then you're gonna sort of sign on to this defund the police, whatever that means. I mean, I don't even know what it means, but if you're going to sign on to that kind of stuff, what do you think is going to happen? If a bunch of people loot in May and run off with baby diapers and whatever else they, television sets and anything else that isn't nailed down, and the state's attorney, who we really haven't talked about much here,
and we will, but we do have to break. Judith, you have mastered the position of talking right up to the commercial break. We'll be back with you, John Cass, and Roberto in a moment. Bruce DuMont back. Thanks very much for joining us this evening. We've got a lot of comments coming in here this evening. Let me go to a couple of them here because they were on opposite sides. There's one person who writes in. This is Doug Dunlap. Bruce, you're the best in the business. You're fair in your comments. And Chris Alaganis writes, I'm out. Terrible show, Bruce DuMont. Your people owe me an apology. So there you go. Win some, lose some. John Cass, I want to go back to you, and I had asked the question before about what's likely to happen next. To what extent is the business community in Chicago and around the nation, to what extent are they putting pressure on local leaders to clean up their act and give them more police protection?
Well, thanks, Bruce. And before we continue, sorry about the technical difficulties, and I want to be clear on this as well, that I do believe that people with legitimate grievance have a right to protest, and that I do believe that radicals of all sides take advantage of grievances, and that's what we're seeing from the left now. And we'll see it from the right again, as we did in the 1950s again. Mm-hmm. Now, your question about the businesses. COVID-19, the Wuhan coronavirus, whatever you want to call it, has changed the face of, I think, the face of commercial real estate in major cities. Add to that the fact that business owners will be able to conduct business over the phone or Zoom or whatever with their people and cut down the overhead, puts amazing stress on big city budgets that are going to be losing property tax revenue. On top of that, you have the violence with the left attacking Democratic-run cities, so Democratic administrations. And the combination is not good. And I just, a couple days ago, I interviewed commerce secretaries in Indiana and Michigan, Indiana and Wisconsin. And they're saying to the businesses, come on down. You know, businesses are flocking there, as Roberto knows. And that's bad for the states that cannot deal with the violence issue.
One follow-up I want to ask you, John, for those listening around the country as well as here in Illinois. Earlier in the program, both Roberto and Judith, they offered their condolences to President Trump on the death of his brother Robert, who he described as one of his best friends. The other news that we have woken up to in Illinois in the last couple of days is that the longest-serving governor in Illinois history, James R. Thompson, former United States attorney, had passed away. He was in his late 80s. You have written about him. You've covered him. And you've also been critical of sort of the political combine that really he was a part of creating. But as you look at the contributions of Jim Thompson, both good and bad, where would you put him in the history of Illinois as a political leader?
I'd say he was a masterful politician. I'll never forget when he was running for re-election after lying about raising taxes. Remember that, guys?
Yes, yep.
He didn't raise taxes.
Yep.
And then I saw him at a African-American church, a black church, in a choir robe, up with the choir, clapping, a little bit off time. You know, his timing was a little different.
Just a little bit.
But I thought this guy has, chutzpah. He did. Now I disagreed with a lot of what he did, but he was a deal maker. And the pension system and the failure of the public pension is not Mike Madigan's alone, right? I keep saying that.
Right.
Republicans help, but then again, Jim Thompson bent the clock back. He put us in the time machine. He turned the clock back to midnight and got the Chicago White Sox to stay in Chicago. So I have to give him, and broke some arms along the way to get funding.
Sure.
So I have to give him some credit there.
And what grade would you give him as the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois? Because this is an integral part of his political bio that people listening to this broadcast around the country may not know about.
Yes, the U.S. Attorney in Illinois in the Thompson years and his people that took on after him, basically they put four governors in prison, right? And I give them credit for that because they proved their cases in court that the governors of Illinois were corrupt. But then again, Bruce, I find that in all that time, in all the 50 years or more that people have been focusing on big city politics, I've never seen the Chicago mayor get indicted. And I wonder, is it like the magic dust of reform that some fairy sprinkles on the fifth floor to keep it clean? I just wonder about that.
Do we have a situation now that our current U.S. Attorney, who has already knocked on the door of Edward Burke, the longtime alderman of the 14th Ward, but now certainly is breathing down the neck of Speaker Michael Madigan, could this be the next great U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois who's bent on getting rid of corruption?
He and the FBI in Chicago are doing an amazing job. Whether they get Boss Madigan, it remains to be seen. But they already got ComEd,
right,
and a $200 million bribery deal.
Right.
So people will be talking, and I don't know, but I applaud the effort, even though I think all of us thought maybe that Mike Madigan should have retired 10 years ago to some castle in Kilkenny.
An interesting record for the Trump Justice Department in the Northern District of Illinois. John Cass, thank you very much. I apologize to you, our listeners, for all the technical problems we had this evening. Roberto Montano, thanks for carrying the ball for Joe Biden. Judith Sherwin, thanks very much for representing the president. I'm Bruce DuMont. See you next week. Good night from Evanston, Illinois.